Hello again, tech team. We are so grateful for you. Let me just confirm with our sanctuary folks that you can hear me again. We lost our Wi-Fi for a bit. Could I get a wave of hands if you can hear me? Yes, hooray, hooray. Okay, here we go. Okay, so today I have a story to share with you. It is the story of Esther. Esther, a book in the Jewish scriptures, which has, oh my goodness, y'all, it's got a lot of suspense. It's got a whole lot of family drama. It has political intrigue, and it is one of those stories where you get to cheer for the heroes, and it all works out in the end. Thank goodness. Esther's story is retold every year by Jewish congregations as part of a really great holiday called Purim, which this year starts on Thursday night, this coming Thursday night. So I'm going to invite you to have some fun with a serious undertone as we discover what Esther's story has to teach us today. And throughout the service, we're going to tell the story of Esther in 3 parts. So as we get into it, I first want to introduce you to the characters. First of all, we have a king. Check it out. Here is King Ahasuerus. In the story, it is said that he ruled over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. That's a lot of provinces. Now, this King Ahasuerus has a very quick temper, and he likes to throw banquets, as you will learn. Okay, so that's our first character. Next, we have Queen Vashti, who is the wife of King Ahasuerus. Okay, next character, we've got 3 more. Here is our heroine, Esther. She is a Jewish young woman, and she is going to play a pivotal role in this story. Next, we have Mordecai. Mordecai is Esther's uncle, and he too is going to be a pretty important person to watch in our story. Last of all, we have our villain. This is Haman. He is the king's top official, and as you will learn, Haman is up to no good. All right, you've met the people you needed to meet, so now let's tell the story. It begins with a banquet. King Ahasuerus throws a banquet, and would you believe this banquet goes on for 6 months straight? Like literally 6 months. That's all they do is have a banquet. It's unbelievable. One day, King Ahasuerus orders Queen Vashti to come to the banquet to show off how beautiful she is. But guess what? She refuses. She does not want to show up for this banquet. Woof. So King Ahasuerus is angry. He says, she's no longer queen. And he goes looking for a new queen. Okay, so by the way, for those of us who might be interested in Jewish folklore, this reminds me a lot of the story that Adam, you remember Adam, like Adam and Eve? Adam, it said, had a wife before Eve. Her name was Lilith. And Lilith left because Adam was trying to boss her around and she didn't like it. So anyway, we can see right away that our King Ahasuerus likes being in charge, and he really does not like it when women stand up to him. This is going to be very important later on in the story. And unfortunately, this is the last we see of Queen Vashti, who sounds pretty cool to me. So bye-bye, Queen Vashti. We'll see you, but not in this story anymore. Okay, so what happens next? So the king has said, I need a new queen. Meanwhile, lots of women are being recruited to join the harem of the king, including our heroine, Esther. Now, when the king meets Esther, he thinks that she is just wonderful, and he makes her the new queen. But what he doesn't know is that Esther is Jewish. She has kept this a secret. So here's Esther. She's the new queen. And meanwhile, Esther's beloved uncle Mordecai. Mordecai has gotten into the habit of hanging around the palace so that he can visit with Esther when she's free. The two of them are very close. And one day, Mordecai overhears two of the king's guards plotting to kill the king. Can you believe it? Mordecai tells Esther, and Esther tells the king, and the plot is thwarted. Mordecai is a hero. Would you believe we're just getting started with this story? I told you it was very action-packed. Okay, so Mordecai has saved the day. He's a hero. What happens next is that Haman runs into Mordecai at the palace gate. Now, Haman is used to people bowing down before him, but Mordecai does not bow down before him. And you know what happens? Haman gets really, really mad. Haman knows that Mordecai is Jewish. And he is so mad, he decides he's not just going to kill Mordecai, he's going to kill all the Jews in the kingdom. Can you believe it? That's so messed up. But I'll tell you what it reminds me of. Here in the United States, we too are seeing people at the highest levels of our government using their authority to pursue personal vendettas, to go after people who have dared to stand up to them, and to use the resources of the state to do it in ways that make life worse for all of us. That's literally happening. So I can relate to this story. Now, one thing I got to tell you about how Jewish people like to tell this story. When Jewish congregations act out this story, there is a tradition that you shake a noisemaker like this and say, boo, when Haman gets up to no good. And so, to this idea that politicians should use the power of the state to take out their own personal grudges, I'm going to say, boo. Take that. Wow. All right, so continuing our story. Haman, up to no good. Haman goes to the king and says to the king, hey, king, the Jews are too different from everybody else, and we should just get rid of them. Now, this king is not very good at thinking for himself. So he says, sure, okay, go for it. So Haman, what does Haman do? He sends a bunch of letters out all over the kingdom in the name of the king, telling the governors of all the provinces to kill all the Jews on a certain day coming up. Now, don't worry, there's a happy ending, so you don't have to despair. But for now, Mordecai and all the Jews across the country mourn and weep. But what they don't do is they don't just accept it. So when our story continues, we're going to hear about Mordecai and Esther's plan to save the Jewish people. But that's all for the moment. So I want to continue on with the story of Esther. This is part 2. So here's what happens. You remember that Mordecai is now aware that the king has ordered that all the Jews can be killed. So he goes to find Esther, and he tells Esther about it. He asks her to go to the king and beg him not to do it. Now, Esther says to him, you don't know what you're asking me to do. If anybody comes into the presence of the king without being invited, that person will be killed, unless the king just decides that he's happy you are there. And she says, the king has not asked to see me in a month, so this might not go well. Mordecai replies, you know, if you don't do this, there's no guarantee you're going to be safe. And he says, Who knows? Maybe you've become queen exactly for such a time as this. So Esther agrees, and she asks the community for support. She asks Mordecai to ask all the Jews in the city to fast for 3 days on her behalf, and she'll be fasting too. This is a way of preparing spiritually. And after the 3 days, she says she will go to the king, and if she dies, so be it. So this is a big ask. Esther is literally risking her life. And I want to just name that Esther is living in a patriarchal culture with a king at the top who is not particularly self aware, and he is completely authorized to use violence against anyone he doesn't like. So for her to confront him, it's a big risk. Esther is a hero. And I'm also really struck by Mordecai's suggestion that maybe Esther is where she is exactly for such a time as this. And I wonder, with everything that we are going through right now, how would your attitude change if you believed that you were meant to be right here, right now, that you were put here to make a contribution to your community and your world that only you could make? How would that change your attitude toward what you're going through right now? Let's just take a couple breaths to sit with that. Okay, thank you. So let's go back to the story. Here's the king. He's in his meeting hall, and Esther approaches the king. This is the big moment. And you know what? He's delighted to see her. He sees that she's upset, and he asks her, how can he make it better? He says, literally, ask me anything. He says, I will give you anything at all, up to half of my whole kingdom. Esther makes just one request. She asks for the king and Haman to come to a private banquet that she will host for the two of them. When Haman gets the word that he's invited to the banquet, he's the only one. He's excited. But he's going to be less excited when he finds out what Esther has in store when our story continues. Oh, thanks for that, everybody. Thank you. Okay, it's time to wrap up our story of Esther. So when we hit the pause on the story, Esther, you might remember, had just invited the king and Haman to a private banquet. And meanwhile, this is important. Do you remember how Mordecai saved the king's life a while back when he overheard the plot? Oops, sorry for the glare. When he overheard the plot to assassinate the king. Well, while Esther is getting the banquet ready, the king remembers that he's never done anything to reward Mordecai. So he sits down with Haman, our villain, and says, hey, Haman, what should I do if I really want to honor someone? Now, Haman thinks he is the person the king wants to honor. So Haman says, if you want to honor someone, you should dress that person in fancy robes. And you should let that person ride one of your horses and put a fancy crown on the horse. And you should have that person be the star of a parade all throughout the city with people yelling, this is what is done for the person whom the king wants to honor. So the king thinks these are really great ideas. So he says to Haman, yes, I am putting you in charge. Go do all that stuff you just said. Go do that for Mordecai. Ooh, Haman is so angry, but he has to do it because the king has ordered him to. Ugh. And then comes the private banquet. We've got Esther and the king and Haman. And at the banquet, the king says to Esther, ask me for a favor. I'll give you anything. So Esther says to the king, give me my life and give my people their lives because someone is out to destroy us. The king says, who is this person who would dare to do such a thing? Esther points at Haman and says, it's him. She reveals that she's Jewish. And she asks the king to stop Haman and call off the killings all over the kingdom. And that's what the king does. The Jews are safe. So we're almost at the end of the story, but not quite. And I almost don't really want to tell you this next part, but it is the story. And please remember, this is a story. This did not happen in real life. In the story, the king kills Haman and he tells the Jews all over his empire, oops, I'm sorry. And because I'm so sorry, I give you permission to kill all your enemies. And the Jews go ahead and kill all their enemies. So, okay, that's how it ends. But I want to be really clear. I am not endorsing this part of the story. Please do not go and kill your enemies. Don't do that. As Unitarian Universalists, we have a long tradition, of course, of engaging with the Bible, telling the stories that we find in the Bible, thinking about what they mean. And we also have a long tradition that says we don't have to agree with everything in the Bible. So if something in the Bible seems wrong to us, we get to say we don't agree with that. And that last part, I don't agree with that. But what I do hope is that you will take courage and inspiration from Esther's bravery and Mordecai's wisdom. In this moment, when our community and our world need this fellowship so much to witness and act for what we believe in, I hope that you will show up. Because who knows? Maybe you are here exactly for such a time as this.